All right. This next section we're going to do here actually has four. It's got four small sections combined into one. Okay, it's about four different countries and what was going on in those countries during this time period that we're studying, largely the 1800s in Europe. So we'll start off with England, who we haven't talked about at all, and there's a good reason why. The reason why we haven't talked about England at all in our studies of the 1800s is because they didn't have any revolts or revolutions. We know that the government of England already had given Parliament a lot of power and had taken a lot of power from the king. And this is something that the people like. So while in other countries around Europe, they're having revolutions, they're trying to nationalize and liberalize, use Enlightenment ideas in their government. In England, they already had a lot of Enlightenment ideas. Um, and what happens is that at each step, as the rest of Europe is clamoring to make changes to increase liberalism, Enlightenment ideas in their government, England will make the change before the people have to revolt or have a revolution. So in 1832, Britain passes laws that give more people the right to vote, largely the industrial middle class, okay? Upper class workers in the city at this point. Um, and again, in the 1850s and 60s, we're going to see more people given the right to vote, which is just going to keep the people happy. They were also doing well economically, so it's easy for the people to be happy when there's a lot of jobs and there's enough food and things are going pretty well. During this time period, England has maybe its greatest monarch, Queen Victoria. I know we've talked about Queen Elizabeth being one of the greatest. Interesting that in England, maybe their two greatest monarchs were women, were queens. Um, Queen Victoria rules England for 64 years. She starts off ruling England at the age of 18. Um, and during this period, things in England go well. Economically, things are going well. The Queen works with Parliament, but really is very hands off and allows Parliament to do its thing, which is exactly what needed to be done in order to continue to give people rights, continue to give people um, liberal ideas, the right to vote, eventually working in even some basic reforms to the industrial system, putting some rules on businesses that we weren't seeing happen in other parts of Europe. So England is really, again, starting in the 1600s, we're going to see that England's kind of a step ahead of the rest of Europe. And for that reason, they don't have revolutions or revolts. France. Now, look, we talked about France having an 1830 revolt where they changed their government, an 1848 revolt where they changed their government again. They experiment with socialism, with national workshops, and then they end up with this guy, Louis Napoleon, as emperor. And in 1852, Louis Napoleon has a vote, and he makes himself emperor. He becomes a dictator. Okay, he takes all the rights, but he did things that made the people happy in this period. He built roads and canals and railroads and harbors for ships and trading. And the people are generally happy. In the 1860s, there's a little talk about why does this guy have all the power? So he rebuilds Paris. He makes wide, broad avenues. He puts an underground sewage system and he brought clean water into the city. So again, we're seeing a guy who generally is able to make positive changes that keep the people happy. Although in 1870, when Prussia comes in and defeats France in war, saddles them with war reparations, takes the area of Alsace and Lorraine, which actually, interestingly, is where Champagne, the only true Champagne grapes, come from. We're going to find that Napoleon will be deposed, they will get rid of him, and they will find someone new. In Austria in 1848, we said that they tried to have a revolution. Heck, they almost did, right? The Czechs got certain rights, certain autonomy, certain freedoms to rule itself. But then when the Hungarians, who were actually a larger group in the Austrian Empire and were very culturally different than the Austrians, unlike the Czechs, who were very similar culturally to the Austrians, and when the Hungarians started asking for their rights and some power, Austria goes to Russia and gets some help. At this point, Russia's not involved in the game. Austria had been defeated by Prussia in 1866, had lost land in Italy, which was rich land, um, and they were on the ropes. So in 1867, when the Hungarians ask for rights, the Austrians say, okay, we're not strong enough to fight you. And they create a dual monarchy, okay? They call it the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, a dual empire, excuse me. And they have one king, but they have two capital cities. This is Budapest, this is Vienna, and they're tied together financially and militarily. And they will stay that way for the next 50-ish years. So in Austria, we do see that the Hungarians get some rights. They get some independence. The last of these four countries we're going to talk about here is Russia. Russia was still very rural. And the ruler ruled with total power. Now, after 1856, when they were defeated in the Crimean War, which broke up the concert of Europe, the alliance, five big country balance of power, when France and Britain attacked Russia because they were taking land and they thought Russia might get too powerful, Russia pulls back, right? But during this time period, Russia makes some really important changes. They have an emperor named Alexander II, okay? And Alexander II makes some really important changes. First off, he ends serfdom. Russia was the last country to hold on to serfdom. And remember, serfdom is more than just being a poor peasant. You are tied to the land. You cannot leave. You are largely, you owe a debt to your lord that you'll never pay back. You're kind of their slave. And I don't like using that word. It's not like American slavery, but it's not freedom that these peasants had. And at least now, right, they bought up some land. They gave peasants a little bit of land. They gave some of that land to the lords. And now the people of Russia have the freedom to do as they please. They can leave Russia, go to the big cities instead of being stuck, tied to the lord's land. But the peasants didn't have good land or much knowledge about farming. And during these first years, the peasants suffer greatly. In 1881, Alexander II is assassinated. He is killed by a terrorist group, but who were upset that the people were living so difficultly. But on his person, sadly, they find that he had plans to try and help the peasants even further, and that he was working on a program that would help peasants get off the ground, so to speak. But he never got a chance to do that, of course, because in 1881 he was assassinated. The next ruler, Alexander III, pulls back on the reforms. He said, I don't want to, I'm not going to try and make these changes that got, by my predecessor, Alexander II, killed. And then Russia will kind of go backwards in terms of giving people rights.